Welcome to Villanova University, the Center for Church Management, and the first in our three-part webinar series on new research on the reuse of church real estate. My name is Matt Davis. I'm the Associate Director here. And again, welcome. Great to have you with us. So here at Villanova, we love and have a great pride in being an Augustinian Catholic university. So I wanted to share this opening prayer here from St. Augustine. I want to take a second now just to quiet your hearts and minds and allow yourselves to breathe in the Holy Spirit, which is the invitation of St. Augustine here. I invite you to quietly pray with me this prayer in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Breathe in me, O Holy Spirit, that all my thoughts may be holy. Act in me, O Holy Spirit, that my work too may be holy. Draw my heart, O Holy Spirit, that I love but what is holy. Strengthen me, O Holy Spirit, to defend all that is holy. Guard me then, O Holy Spirit, that I may always be holy. Amen. So our mission in the Center for Church Management is to provide education and scholarship in the Augustinian Catholic tradition on strategic management and financial matters in service to leaders of churches and other Christian faith-based ministries. Here in the center, we strive to bridge mission with management. We try to take the best from the business world, the management world, the leadership world. We adapt it, we integrate it, and we try to do that to help churches better serve their mission to live and share the gospel of Jesus Christ. So the Center for Church Management has three main branches. I want to highlight quickly two of those branches. So really the most important thing we do is our Masters of Science in Church Management. In this program, you do a deep dive into topics like church human resources, church strategic planning, church finances and budgeting, church facilities, things like that. This is a 30 credit degree program from the Villanova School of Business. It's a 2-year program. It's online. It's got both live and asynchronous learning. I'm a 2021 grad of the program. I loved it. Could not say good enough things about it. Enrollment is now open. We have generous scholarship opportunities available as well. For you, or if you know anyone who might be interested, please connect them to me. I'd love to share more about the program. You can reach me at m.davis, so m.davis @villanova.edu. Our third branch that I want to share a little about today is our research and scholarship. So some of our research is done by the center itself. In other cases, we sponsor scholars like we're doing today here with Amy, and they do research with us. We use their research to make sure our content or our course content is always up to date, cutting edge, using the best research available. This is so we can better empower and inform church leaders to do their mission and do their service of the church well. So I want to give you a quick agenda for today. In a second here, we'll introduce our presenter, Amy Lawton. She's going to present on her topic with this case study of churches in Boston for about 25-30 minutes. And when she's done, we'll have a Q&A. In order to submit a question for the Q&A, I want you to use the chat box you find at the bottom of your screen. If you have a question in the first 2 minutes or in the middle or the end, anytime you have a question, put it in the chat box. I'll be monitoring it. After Amy's presentation, I'll share the questions with her. A reminder also to keep yourself on mute so you don't interrupt the presentation. I now want to introduce Dr. Matthew Mannion. He's a professor of practice in the Department of Management and Operations in the Villanova School of Business. He's also the David Grennan Family Faculty Director of the Center for Church Management in the Villanova School of Business. Matt, please.
Thank you, Matthew Davis, and it's great to be with you all and good to see familiar faces here. A number of our alums from the Masters of Church Management are on here, as well as a lot of other friends. And just to underline what Matt Davis was saying there, this is one of the key components of our mission, is to share research that we think can really benefit practitioners and church leaders like each one who's gathered here today. So we thank you for your time and thank you for the investment here and thank you for helping us fulfill that piece of our mission. Um, and I'm really excited that we have the chance to spend some time this afternoon with Dr. Amy Lawton. So as it says there, she's the Director of Research and Special Projects within the President's Office with Dr. Wendy Kaj, our neighbor right down the road at Bryn Mawr College. And she's also the research manager at the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab at Brandeis University and has been involved there. She's got a tremendous background that I think fits perfectly with the kind of work that we like to do at the Center for Church Management. And so she's got a Ph.D. in sociology from the University of Connecticut. And so part of what it's been 5 minutes and nobody from Villanova has mentioned the fact that Pope Leo is a graduate, an alum of Villanova University. So here's your official acknowledgement that Pope Leo is an alum of it. But part of what Leo's, part of the Holy Father's motto is that we are all one in the one. And so the importance of building bridges and building connections. And so Villanova is had a lot of pride in his basketball team over the years, maybe a little less so the last few years. But part of our bridge building is forming partnerships with people from UConn who are the current dynasty in basketball. So we're grateful for that. But in addition to having a sociology degree from the University of Connecticut, she did our fascinating dissertation work. I think some of us might want to link that up in the future. But the dissertation title was Donor Bodies, Medical Schools, and the Scientific Sacred. So kind of took a look at how medical schools ritualize and memorialize the gift of donors who donate their bodies for scientific research after their death, which I think is a fascinating piece to understand and better. The learnings from that I think can be really huge. But in addition, she's done work with Springtide Research, a number of other researchers over the years, and we're blessed to have her as one of our research fellows for this past year. And so this area that we've been taking a look at, which is the theme for these 3 webinars over the next several weeks, is church real estate. So in the church management space, as we've learned, many of you who've been in our classes know, how to deal with properties is a major issue for churches. And so I think Dr. Lawton here, Amy's going to set the stage for us through the fascinating research that she and her team did, taking a look. So part of it was kind of just get the landscape of how much church property is changing hands. And so that's what we're going to get a particular look at with all the transactions that have taken place in Boston for the last 20 some years or so. So Amy's going to give us the first presentation, and then we're going to take a look over the next couple of weeks about how churches are some alternative uses they're finding for it. And so that's just like a preview of coming attractions. But we thought it's helpful to kind of get a bigger picture of how much is happening with churches that are choosing to use their real estate differently, and particularly in this case, choosing to sell their real estate. So, Amy, we're so grateful for the work that you've already done. Matt Davis and I and the rest of our team have had the chance to see this presentation earlier this summer, but we're really thrilled to bring this to the rest of you so we can begin to learn from what are the lessons from the past and what are the lessons from some other churches that have made the decision, in this case, to sell their properties. So, Amy, I'm going to hand it over to you. You can take over screen sharing for us, and we look forward to what do you have to say?
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that warm welcome. I'm so happy to be here. I'm very excited to share some of our findings. I've tried to couch them in a little bit more of a story about what's happening in Boston more broadly, instead of just saying, here are the numbers and let's see let's see how those land with you. So I have a couple cases to talk about. I gave a presentation that was a variation of this a couple weeks ago to some people who had really probing questions about, well, what happens if you have to sell a cemetery? So I have to declare right away, I'm not an expert on that. We just did church buildings. But if that's an interest of yours, I will help you figure that out too, because that's also one of the things that's really pressing in this topic. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and get started. Let's see.
And while you're sharing your screen there, do you have the permissions to do it, Amy?
Yes, yeah, I'm just inept. That's
now it's coming up. While you're doing that and while it's getting set up, I did just want to acknowledge too for everyone here, and including some of the folks who are on this call, but we're so grateful to the benefactors of the Center for Church Management who make research like this possible. So there's a private family foundation that funded the research fellows this past year, and these presentations are being accomplished by the support of our advisory council and a grant that we received from the Lilly Endowment. So we're grateful to all those who make these things possible, including the ones who are on the Zoom today. So with that, we can talk about Relinquished Houses of Worship in Boston.
All right, so I'm calling them relinquished houses of worship because it's not just churches, even though it's mostly churches. And it's not churches that are closed necessarily. It's churches that have, for whatever reason, given up their property, and you'll see some of these cases doesn't mean they're closed. Um, the subtitle of this talk is Buying, Selling, Preserving, and Converting. Those are the different types of things we're going to touch on. So this is a map of what we defined as the greater Boston area. It is the smallest area that can be considered greater Boston, and it's actually 97 cities and towns. And the blue dots are churches that have closed between the years of 2000 and 2022. And the green dots are churches that merged with another congregation, but they gave up one of the buildings. So the dot is the building that was given up. It was either sold or closed or demolished or one of these many things that can happen. As you can see, we identified in this time period 196 congregations that closed. Why did we start in the year 2000? Because we had to start somewhere. Why did we stop in the year 2022? Because that's when we started collecting data. And if you've ever done a very large data set, you know that continuing to add new data as it comes in can be very challenging. So this is a snapshot of the beginning of the 20th century, what's closing down in Boston. What did we count? We counted any house of worship of any religious tradition that closed permanently or gave up its property to merge with another congregation. When we do social science, we always talk about the unit of analysis. What is the specific thing we're counting? And in this case, what we counted was the address of the property that closed. If there was a satellite campus and it was a different address, that's treated separately. That didn't really come up, but we sort of went into this knowing that there could be different campuses of some of these churches. This is a picture of the Holy Trinity German Church in Boston, which was the parish was suppressed in 2008, and the church was deconsecrated in 2012, and eventually sold to a property developer that turned it into luxury condominiums. And this is a very striking photo to start out with because, as you can see, they preserved a huge amount of the church, the entire facade. And the structure of the church, the first 3 stories of condos are all built within the original structure of the cathedral. But then they added a bunch of stuff on top of it. And if you search for this church online, you will find some people who think that this is a beautiful conversion and should be the model of every conversion that is done throughout the United States. And then there's also people in a subreddit on the website Reddit. The subreddit is called Urban Hell, and they think this is the ugliest thing they've ever seen, and nobody should ever do anything like this ever again. So I'm starting the presentation with this because this is a very interesting piece of property in addition to being a very interesting parish. This was one of the German-speaking parishes in Boston for a long time, and it was doing a traditional Latin Mass up until it closed. It was fairly well attended. A lot of churches would be very happy to have 200 parishioners come to Mass, but this is one of the churches and it wasn't suppressed in the big reorganization of 2004, it happened later. For the first few years, they thought they could maybe get between let's say about $4 million for it. And they actually did quite well. They sold to a property developer for about $7 million. The interesting thing about this, though, is that this church is located in the south end of Boston. It's easy access to Back Bay. It's easy access to Chinatown. And if you buy one of the luxury apartments in this building, one of the 4-bedroom apartments especially, that'll run you about $5.5 million. So one of the 33 condos in this building is now being sold for the equivalent of, in the same ballpark, of what the entire church was sold for. Now, this is, of course, a very realistic, I'm not saying this should not have happened. This is a very realistic picture of the Boston real estate market, but it gives you a sense of how valuable this land is and how valuable it is to have a residence near Back Bay, near Chinatown in Boston. So this, I think it's a very legitimate thing to have as an open question. Is this a good idea to have this church be converted into these type of condos? And I'm not here to answer that, but that is kind of the question I'm posing throughout my presentation. Just a very quick note on methods about how we identify these churches. This one was easy. It was in all the papers. Everybody knew this building is called the Lucas. Um, it actually has its own web presence that's bigger and better than my own. Like this is a very well-established building, but it's very hard to find other closed congregations. So we did searches in the Boston Globe and other regional papers. We did Google searches and Google Street View, which is very helpful for any churches that closed after 2009. We were able to look up and see, well, is a building literally there? We interviewed architects and developers who've done the transitions, including the architects who worked on this project that I'm showing you the picture of here. We contacted all of the diocese and regional level religious organizing bodies of the 30 or so largest religious traditions in the Boston area. And then, most extensively, we did a deed search in each registry of deeds in the area. Massachusetts is very strange because there are 21 registries of deeds throughout the state. Some counties have more than one. It's very tricky to try to figure out where the property actually is and who has a record of the transaction. So, because it was tricky, I'm just going to walk you through how we identified a case and sort of what we learned about it. And in doing so, also show you what I think is one of the sort of sadder cases that we learned about. So this is a church in Bellingham, Massachusetts. We found it through the Bellingham Historical Commission Facebook page. They were celebrating that this church used to be the center of their town. It gave the address. The church was opened in 1927, but the chapel church that's pictured here wasn't built until 1960. There was a parochial school that was very well attended. And then, because repairs were costly, this was one of the parishes that was suppressed in 2004. And I love this picture that they were sharing on their Facebook page. This is a picture that I think is, um, it might even be an illustration from before the church was even completed, right? Like this is the dream of this community to build this chapel and to educate 1,000 students in their parochial school. So we knew that there was a church that had closed in Bellingham, Massachusetts, and we had the address thanks to the Historical Commission. So we went to Google Street View and we plugged it in. Let's see what's there right now. The above a picture is Google Street View 2012. So we know that this is one of the churches that had been demolished because there's absolutely nothing there. And then if you go forward in time to Google Street View 2015, and the last 10 years, the pictures are all about the same, that's when we see a CVS and other commercial real estate pop up on this property. If you have an aerial view, I couldn't find a good picture for this presentation, but if you look at the aerial view, there's this neighborhood all close around this CVS that very clearly was built up around a church. It wasn't built up around a pharmacy. And we thought, well, this is a really interesting case. The property was always, obviously, the church was not valuable to someone else in this case, but the property was. How much did the church sell for? We requested the deed based on this street address that we knew was correct because we had the Historical Commission information. And when we requested the deed for that address, we got this really awkward document. It was actually sold as part of a bundle of 12 parcels of land in Bellingham that were all sold by the church about this at the same time as part of the same transaction. So we don't even really know what the church sold for, right? This is one of the asterisks in our report. We know it was part of this bundle that was sold for about $800,000, but any one of those slots under the right circumstances would have been worth $800,000. So we had to think about how are we going to count that? Is this is a church, obviously, that um, we have to count as demolished, we have to count as sold, but we don't even know what like the how big it was or how much it sold for. In other cases, the deeds are much more specific. I can tell you exactly what it sold for, and I can tell you exactly the square footage of every building that was on the property. So keeping that in mind, I can tell you that of the 131 titles we found that are specific about the number of what it was sold for. We found $209 million in sales in this 23-year period. We went through every single sale and converted it to $2025 adjusted for inflation. This is not meant to give you a sense of the value of the real estate, but to give you a sense of the amount of money involved in how we think about numbers today. It's almost $300 million in 2025 dollars. It came out about 294 million about. So we're talking about even with sort of our rough estimates and having to exclude, we don't know what this church sold for because it was part of a bigger thing. We know it was a huge amount of property and we know it transacted for a huge amount of money. Um, we broke it down just for ease of interpretation into what were the mainline churches, the Catholic churches, the Jewish churches, and then miscellaneous is kind of a grab bag of other traditions. Um, the churches are pretty evenly split, mainline and Catholic. The mainline Protestant churches, what we counted as mainline were American Baptist Disciples of Christ, Episcopal, Evangelical Lutheran Presbyterian Church USA, United Church of Christ, and United Methodist Church. Um, Roman Catholic obviously didn't take any interpretation on our part. Jewish, we put all the Jewish traditions together. And then miscellaneous is this kind of interesting grab bag. I just want to point out a couple of things about it. One of which is that the 7 Christian Science churches that closed in Boston was sort of something we didn't expect because the Christian Science Church is actually headquartered in Boston. Um, and we thought that would look a little bit different. We were also really surprised that we found a Buddhist congregation that closed. It was the only one that wasn't a Christian or Jewish tradition. And the reason that was surprising to us is because some of these other churches were being bought by Buddhist groups and being opened as, um, various different centers. I don't want to all say houses of worship because that's not accurate, but various different Buddhist programming in the Boston area. Um, just a word about why the religious tradition matters. Church polity on how you sell a building is very different from tradition to tradition. Even within the mainline traditions, it's wildly different from each other. We could have thought about this differently and said, oh, we'll put all the congregational polity together and all everybody else in a different basket. But we thought that wasn't quite enough nuance. So what I'll say instead is
Amy,
that
excuse me. Sorry. Can I ask you can you define polity for those who are not familiar with that word?
yes, of course.
That's
So
good.
church polity is the governance process for the church.
Thank you.
Um, And when we talk about polity, we're talking about generally 4 different types of church organization. You have an Episcopal polity if you have a bishop. You have a connectionalist polity if you have a hybrid polity of a bishop and congregation. Congregational churches are governance based in the congregation. And then, of course, we have the Presbyterian small p churches, which are governed by nesting committees. So because of these different things, the question is, well, is it one pastor who has to sell a church, or is it 20 committees who has to sell a church? That's 20 is maybe an exaggeration, but it's a lot. It's a lot of committees in some of these regions. So what we can conclude from that is it's not the same process to sell a Catholic church and a Baptist church, but it's not even the same process to sell 2 Baptist churches. We did an interview with a woman who works with the American Baptist Church in New England, and she talked about how, normally we don't get involved in this because most churches hold their own, title to the land. But sometimes churches will go to sell and they'll find out that the regional body has the title and the congregation didn't own the church, and it's a huge shock to everyone because it's not how Baptists govern themselves. So that was really interesting. Sometimes the owner of the building is a complete mystery. Um, we have churches in the Boston area that are old enough that we don't really know who owns the building. We have a trail of deeds, right? It's been held in trust or passed through this group of people, and the boundaries of the land have shifted and whatever. Um, but it's not always perfectly clear who is going to be the person to sign off on that document when they pass the title along. And from all this, we do suspect that religious traditions with real estate offices might be at an advantage in the real estate market. Obviously, the Archdiocese, the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Boston has a lot of real estate people that the Free Baptist churches probably don't have resources to for. But I will say that even if you are part of a tradition that doesn't have this structure supporting decisions in real estate, that the United Church of Christ is out in front with its legacy church specialists. They've really given a lot of thought to when you have to close a church and conclude a ministry, what do you do with the property, and how do you make sure that this continues the mission of the church after it's gone? Here's just a quick overview of how many congregations we found that closed each year. We put it this way just to demonstrate that the reorganization of 2004 was a pretty big blip, but also to demonstrate that church closure is a pretty constant thing. You know, we're not talking about uh, all the churches closed in 2004 and everybody had to deal with that. We're talking about, okay, well, like maybe a quarter of them did, but the rest of the time it's very constant, consistent trickle of closing churches in the area. I keep scrolling the wrong direction when I try to change slides. I'm so sorry about that. This is to me the most exciting finding. I'm a sociologist of religion, and when you talk to sociologists of religion, we like to debate what we call secularization theory, which is exactly what it sounds. It's the premise that society is becoming more secular, and we all have very strong opinions, and we all get together and get really mad at each other about our strong opinions. That's what we do. This is fascinating to me because a pure secularization theory story here would be the churches are closing, they're being torn down, no one needs churches anymore. And what we're actually seeing in a practical sense is about half of the churches are being bought by religious buyers and about half are being bought by property developers. So when we're talking about the churches are closing, what do we actually mean? In 41% of cases, we do not mean that the church is closed. We mean that another congregation is there. That is not a secularization story. The property development story, because of the nature of Boston, I don't know how familiar y'all are with Boston. Boston is tiny. There is not a lot of land, and there's nowhere to expand to the east. There's a harbor. You cannot push Boston any farther out into the Atlantic. And what we found as we were doing this research, we had a meeting with members of the Massachusetts Council of Churches, and there were representatives of, I want to say, three of the historic Black congregations in Boston that are vibrant, thriving congregations. And they have property developers cold calling them and saying, don't you want to sell this property? Because it's so valuable. We need the space so badly for something else. Wouldn't you be happier out in the suburbs? And so far, these, historic congregations have a lot of heft and are able to stay put. But at some point, someone is going to make an offer that's too good. Especially as Boston continues to develop in ways. I'm not a zoning expert, but I can tell you parking is a huge issue for a lot of these congregations. If parking mandates change in an area, that could be something that pushes congregations out, and forces them to sell. So looking at this, I feel like looking at this list of buyers and knowing that some of them are religious bodies, some of them are property developers, and then other people that you would feel good about buying your church, right? Nonprofits, schools, couple individuals bought churches and turned them into single family homes. Um, I will say they look very extravagant. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's actually a very beautiful way to preserve the church, but it's a not something very many people are positioned to do. But mostly this is a story about the pressure of being in a small city with expensive real estate and the pressure of where do you, not how do you sell a church, but how do you buy a church, right? You cannot build a church to your specifications, but you can maybe buy a church that another congregation is leaving. This is again a map of the Boston area. These are the zip codes. All of these are zip codes where a church was sold. The light green are property developers. You can see most expensive property, that's where property developers are buying. A little bit out in the suburbs, but maybe not, not quite as much. This area to the north, also very, very expensive property. This is up towards like Salem. This is, these are high-end properties that are being transacted. The non-property developers, these are the places where mostly it's other religious communities that are trying to move in. In the trade, we call those hermit crabs. One of the interesting findings of this was that we were counting purpose-built churches. So that means we weren't finding or counting churches that started out in a storefront or a home, um, and then closed. Storefront churches, we often think of them as groups that are renting a storefront. I'm from Florida, where storefront churches usually mean that storefront churches, they purchased a storefront and they're intentionally meeting there. Um, those aren't the sales that we're tracking. So we do need a different study to count churches that closed that weren't purpose-built. And then interestingly, 110 of the 131 are still there. They were not demolished. So these intact buildings, we think that this shows that even when developers buy a church, they want the churchy look. Some of these facades are considered historical and that cannot be changed, so you have to preserve them. But a lot of times they're not considered historical and they're preserved only through the request of the seller. So even though you maybe give up some of your negotiating power, if the preservation of the aesthetic of the church is important to you, you can put that as a restriction in the when you sell the property. And I have more examples of that coming up. So this is a cool property. This is one of my happy stories compared to like my sad story about the church in Bellingham. This is the Sacred Heart Church in Natick, Massachusetts. It's now Eastern Acrobatics and Circus. It became a circus school. Of course it did. Why wouldn't it? Um, this was a church that was sold by the Archdiocese in 2004 because the repairs were going to be too expensive. The steeples were rotting, and you see this guy in like repairing the steeple and just how beautiful they were able to restore it. The acrobatic school did the restoration of the entire church at their own expense. They purchased the church for $150,000. They knew they would have to replace both of the steeples. They did incredibly detailed work to make sure it looks exactly the same as it did when the church was first constructed. So these big, heavy steeples are very hard to restore. They are very few carpenters who know how to build them. And the carpenters who build them for you won't necessarily come to your town to do it. So the acrobatic school ordered the steeples from, I believe, a carpenter in Maine, and he shipped them in. Each steeple was a sort of assemble on site over 300 pieces. This was like so involved. Its church is absolutely beautiful, and I think it really speaks to how well this acrobatic school, which is a professional acrobatic school, you can send your kids to summer camp there, but that's not how they make their money. Um, I think it really speaks to how well they value the history they inherited and the place that they have in the community. And I think it really speaks to a well done sale on the part of the archdiocese that they found a buyer who was going to honor and respect what the church continued to look like because that was important to that community. It won't always be, but when it is, I think it's wonderful to see it done well. So, this table is more for my reference. Don't feel like you have to read it. Um, a lot of churches were sold for basically, they were all sold for over $1 million. The Catholic churches were sold for an average of over $2 million. What's interesting is that there were a large number of nominal sales that were done for under $100. And when you consider those, it changes the averages a little bit. So just to give you an example, your average Catholic church um, with nominal sales included was selling for $2.5 million. If you exclude the nominal sale, the $1 sale, it goes up to $2.6 million. So it changes the numbers a little bit, but on the right of the screen, you see the average sale price ranked high to low. The Catholic Church is sold for the most, then the Jewish congregations, the miscellaneous, and then the mainline sold for the least. I have another slide to put this in context in terms of how much square footage was sold for each transaction.
Amy, before you go to the square footage, sorry to interrupt, but can you just kind of comment? So I think if I recall from before, it was like 18 churches that were sold for less than $100 or somewhere in that ballpark. Does that sound about right?
It's under 20 that were
Yeah.
sold for about $100. They were mostly sold to other religious buyers, but other religious buyers doesn't necessarily mean churches. So
Hmm.
they were being sold to people sort of within their denominational family, but they weren't necessarily being, there wasn't necessarily a happy continuity to another congregation is going to move
Right.
in. There are in a couple cases. The one Presbyterian church in the data set, the PCUSA church in Waltham, just $1 sale, and this is exactly what you want to see happen. Sold it to another Presbyterian congregation that was already meeting and needed a
Yeah.
space. It's Taiwanese language. That's really cool. Their Facebook page is not at all in nothing in English. I really enjoyed looking through that. Didn't have any idea what they were talking about, but I thought it was great that they were able to move in and have this really valuable space for not no money at all.
I think it's just important for everyone here to recognize that that's the exception, not the rule
Yeah.
in this data set. Thanks.
And then just to put this in context, we saw that these Catholic properties were selling for, more than twice what the mainline properties were. And we thought, wow, why is that? Well, it's because they're a lot bigger, right? When we talk about the percent of the money in the sales, the Catholic properties sold for about 64% of the money, but they were 70% of the square feet. So we are talking about, and this corresponds to the previous slide, right? The Catholic properties are the biggest, the mainline properties are the smallest because they are include the independent Protestant churches that had no money coming in from the outside. It was just the Baptists of Waltham setting up their church. One of the last things that I found that I thought was just like absolutely worth sharing and putting in people's minds as part of this story, but also maybe as something that will come up in your work or how I'm not exactly sure who's on the call, but I think it's a lot of folks who have very close ties to different churches and might be coming across this in some context. Um, you can, when you sell a church, you can put some really intense restrictions in that sale. Um, I have here an example. The Swedenborgian Church in Newton sold their church, and they didn't include any intense restrictions. They just said that for the next 100 years, there will be a plaque that will say that this was the Church of the Open Word. It will say who designed it. The plaque always has to be durable. It always has to be displayed. And this is going to run with the land. So if the Newton Arts Center that's currently in that church sells the building, the next owner also has to display the plaque. Run with the land is just a phrase I like, that the restriction is on that property regardless of who owns it for a period of time, usually 90 to 100 years in the cases we found. The other covenant that you can put in a deed that you may not be familiar with because it's very rarely used, as far as I can tell, are unjust enrichment covenants. So if you have a church and you have to sell it, and you really don't want the other person to turn around and sell it again, you put in an unjust enrichment covenant. And the way these are usually structured is for a period of years, you can't resell without sharing your profits with me. So in the next year, if you resell, if you get more than 50% of what you paid, 20% of that comes to me. All right, it's sort of structured in a way where um, you are ensuring that you're not being taken advantage of. This is something that I haven't done a comprehensive analysis of. I will say it does seem to be something that the archdiocese is very comfortable using, and I think Protestant churches don't have um, the resources to, I don't think anyone, they don't have real estate agents or consulting telling them that they need to put this in there. So just wanted to share that. This also, unjust enrichment covenant doesn't run with the land, but the other types of covenants do. If you want it to be continued to use as a church, you can request that. If you want it to not be continued to use as a church, you can request that. Um, Many of the Catholic buildings have a covenant that says that nothing that is contrary to the teachings of the Catholic Church can be done in the building, which I think makes people a lot more comfortable about, you know, well, the first buyer wants to use it as an acrobatics school, but what if the second buyer wants to, have a satanic temple? You absolutely can't under any circumstance. So this is just a cool detail and something that I think as people worry about letting go of a church building, especially letting go of a church building that maybe their grandparents, their parents, they got married in, they had their children baptized, they had their funerals in, you have a say, you have some power in what you're letting go of. Okay, so conclusions of the research. Here are the big takeaways. A huge amount of religious property has changed hands in Boston since the turn of the century, but it isn't simply a story of secularization, and it's not just a story about the Roman Catholic Archdiocese reorganizing parishes. People want it to be that. It's not that. That was a blip. It's an important blip, but it's a blip. It is very difficult to count close congregations because we don't really agree on what they are. But if you are counting relinquished properties, you can count the transactions and request the deeds, and then you can be very specific. And that is what we tried to do here. And then once you've identified the property through the deed, you can do this, intense deep dive, not just about what happened to the property, but what happened to the people who worship there. Where did they go? Um, it's amazing to see. There's some cool patterns from a sociological point of view. You see people who will not go anywhere else. They are completely loyal to one example of one church, of one tradition in one place, and once it's closed, they are done. And then you see people who also relocate and move their entire lives to a different part of the city because that's where their congregation is moving to. And I hope somebody takes it up to study those stories and those different reactions, because I think looking at the future of Christianity in America, especially, knowing if what we have is essentially franchise loyalty versus, a thriving faith community that can survive change, I think understanding when those things manifest differently is going to be incredibly critical to the future of religious practice in America. And then finally, implications of the research. Here are the other half of the takeaways. Broadly speaking, two types of people want to buy your church, property developers or other religious groups. That boils down to you can pick a higher sales price or a mission alignment. Not always both, sometimes neither. Um, I didn't get to talk about the tax rules in this presentation, but it is really important to think about as a resource. These are tax-exempt properties that are being added to local tax rolls when they're sold to a property developer. That's a limited resource. We're not creating more tax-exempt properties. So thinking about how we're going to continue to maintain those properties in terms of can you open another church? Yes, but it's going to be difficult in a different way than it was before buying a church that was already off the tax rolls. And then I think the real takeaway is if you manage church property, have a plan, not a fire sale. You can sell your church for $1. I would encourage you not to do it. I would encourage you to hold out a little bit more, ask for the restrictions you need. It will be more difficult, it will be more prolonged, but there are specific consultants within each religion tradition. There are firms helping with this, there are investors helping with this, there are lawyers who are starting to specialize this. It's a tiny group of people, but it's literally all they do. So there are strategies. The best ones that are publicly available are United Church of Christ, their Building and Loans Fund, their Legacy Church program. Uh, Shout out though to the Quakers. They have their t tiny but strong tradition also getting out in front of this. How do you close a meeting and how do you make sure that the church survives that is they have great resources there as well. And that is where I will end on a sort of uplifting note that there are people out there to help you if you are forced to confront this issue.
Amy, thank you so much. Before Matt gets to the questions, just want to say again, this is, I think, really helpful for us because there are, as you dispelled in there, there's lots of, I think it's a good reminder for all of us. There's lots of assumptions about what happens that are not always supported by the data. And so it's good where possible to get some research to make informed decisions about what's really going on. And so I think the fact that this is not a pure secularization story is an important one for us reminder. So the number that would change hands, I think, is really important. And yeah, just the magnitude of it gives us a glimpse. And so again, for those that are here, this is 100 and some churches that houses of worship that changed hands in the last 20 years in Boston. Extrapolate that out across the whole country. It's not going to be the same everywhere. And so that is an opportunity for future research. But I think thanks to the groundbreaking work that you and your team did here, it opens up the idea for other places to look at this kind of stuff. And again, perhaps we can build a national database at some point that would be really fun to see. So thanks again for the great work that you did. I'm going to let Matt MC some of the wonderful questions from our participants today.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Amy, thanks so much as well for sharing your research with us. What I'm going to do, I'm going to ask Amy a few of the questions in the chat box now. If your question's not answered, if you want to ask her an individual question, I'm going to stop the recording at the end and she'll stick around if you want to talk to her more on an individual basis. The first question, it was about the first property you talked about, Amy. I think it could be kind of generalized to all. Was an appraisal done on that property? Do you have a sense of are churches doing appraisals before they kind of go to these property developers and stuff like that? Do you have any sense on that?
So not only do I have a sense of it, I actually in some cases have the appraisal. Um, it's because this is the kind of fun thing you can find on Google. Um, that first one I talked about, the specifically Holy Trinity German, I don't know exactly what their appraisal was. I know that since they were shooting for 4 million and got 7, that was probably, I assume, this is a guess, I'm assuming that was based on the appraisal. Um, the kind of other end of the spectrum is the Swedenborgian church that I mentioned that what they insisted on was a plaque for the next 100 years. Um, their appraisal was made public as um, part of the call for public funds to convert that to an art center. They had an appraisal done in 2014. They found out that the church needed almost $600,000 of repairs just to kind of bring it up to code. So some churches are doing appraisals, and sometimes the appraisals are not good news.
Great, thank you. A second question was, do you know what percentage in this study, what percentage of the property that was changed hands of, I think it's of total property. Do you have a sense of that? Do you know that number?
So that's really tricky because we don't have a comprehensive list of how many houses of worship there are in any region of the United States. Um, we had we had a pretty good count of how many parishes there were in the Archdiocese of Boston, but even that is not actually a count of the properties. So, in the reorganization that happened in 2004, I think they ended up closing like 70, right? But not all of those had what we consider to be church properties. Um, and the way suppression works is not always that everything was sold off. So, like even the absolute best data we have, it's not really accurate to say that we know a percentage of it.
Gotcha. Let's see. This is a technical question. I don't know if you'd be able to answer this, Amy. I'll put it out there. Maybe someone in our group would have kind of a better sense. Says when the Archdiocese of Boston had a parish sold for more than 3.5 million, how was the required 0.01% of the final sale transferred to the congregation for the clergy? Was that at the time the permission was secured, subsequent date when the sale was finalized? You might not know these inner workings of the Catholic Church or not, but
I can tell you we asked, and the person we asked didn't know. So
Okay.
that's that's the best I can do. You have a webinar coming up in a couple weeks with Sister Bethany. I think she might be the person to ask about how that happened.
Mm.
Gotcha. And then I'll add one more, then we'll start to wrap up. This is kind of two different questions. I'll give you both. Were any of the properties in the study converted to affordable housing? Slash, do you know if the properties sold to developers, what percentage went to fair market value, luxury housing versus affordable housing? You have any stats on any of that?
So there's a huge movement to convert um, any kind of church property to affordable housing. And come back next week to hear from Nadia about how that is being done. In Boston, there is a Yiggity movement, yes, in God's backyard, just like every other major metropolitan area in the United States. The tricky thing in Boston is that we rely on a lot of public funds for affordable housing, but it is easier to get public funds for historical conservation than it is for affordable housing. So the catch-22 you have is these churches have to be fundamentally altered to have the affordable housing, but the money that is available for that alteration is less than the money available for the preservation. So the only way to do it is to find another source of money. It's a great thing to do. It's been done effectively a handful of times. And more often, you're going to see affordable or workforce or market rate or some kind of designation as a percentage within a larger luxury development. So you're letting the people with the $5 million penthouse sort of foot the bill for the the one bedrooms that are being rented at what are considered to be affordable rates in Boston. That is not a number that will sound affordable to anywhere else in the world, but if you can, you can get a $2,300 a month one bedroom apartment that's fairly affordable in parts of Boston that we're talking about.
Actually gonna squeeze in one more question. I had the same one, and then we'll start to wrap things up. Do you have a feel for what were the age of the church buildings that were sold? Is the average church building made in 1920, 1880, 1960? Do you have any sense on that from your data?
Yeah, so it's a um don't quote me on this because this is just like I haven't bothered to count, but I have noticed that it's um 19th century and first half of the 20th century buildings. The older stuff is too historical to do something with. The newer stuff is honestly not really part of the stock. The stuff that would have been built more recently would have been built out farther in the suburbs than we went.
Great, makes sense. Well, I'm going to start to wrap things up today. Thanks first to all of you for being here for the first in our three-part webinar series on the reuse of church real estate. Hope you picked up some great ideas and some new insights from this case study of the Boston area. The recording of this webinar will be posted soon on our playlist under the Villanova School of Business YouTube channel. I'll share that link with you once it's posted. Feel free to watch it again or share with others who may be interested. Please consider joining us next Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. We can move from the East Coast to the West Coast. So Nadia Meehan from Rutgers University, she's going to be presenting on understanding land use incentives for affordable housing on religious property, the case of Seattle's faith-based density bonus. Special thanks again to Amy Lawton for sharing her Boston research with us. As I said, she'll stick around a few minutes afterwards if you want to ask an individual question of her. Everyone else, you are free to go. Have a wonderful and blessed weekend. I'm going to stop the recording now. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Amy.